Welcome back to another video. My name is Abby, and today is a special day because I'm going to be sharing with you a conversation that I got to have with my friend, truth seeker, pattern shatterer, and badass Eva Beronius from selfmasteryandbeyond.com. And in this conversation, we're talking about if you want to understand how to change a belief, you have to really understand the belief system in itself, so you can understand how it was created and ultimately make the change that's permanent. So you don't have to run around and change this thing and that thing and this thing. Overall, understand that greater structure so you can make those changes that you want and make them permanent. If you're interested in more of Eva's work, go ahead. She has a podcast. It's beautiful. She is so knowledgeable and really so well articulates all the ins and outs of really uncovering the conditioning and the patterns that you're living through so you can really uncover you. And that's the name of her podcast, Uncover You Podcast. You can check it out on Spotify. I'm going to link all of her information below so you can go over there and check out everything that she has to offer. But without any further delay, I hope you enjoy this conversation.
So what I noticed going on a lot out here, is that when people are talking about belief systems, and often they're not even talking about belief systems or the belief system as an entity itself. They talk about certain limiting beliefs. So they can identify or grasp that, like, okay, I have certain limiting beliefs, and they're limiting me from having what I want, going where I want to go, evolve, grow into what I want to be. So, but how people often go about it and how it's taught is to replace one belief with another. So it's like you take one of, I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy of this, or I can't receive all that money, or whatever it is you're trying to get to. And you say, I have a limiting belief, like I'm not worthy. And then we try and replace it with an opposite or something that feels better. I am worthy. I am so loved. I am, but what we're doing then is trying to, just replace one concept with another concept. And to me, belief system is like a whole entity in itself. It's like the filter that we experience our life through. Our external world, our internal world, who we are. It's the filter that we're looking through that we're often not even aware of is there. It's like we're wearing goggles, we're wearing glasses, and we don't know that filter is there.
Yeah, I like that too, where it's like, it's so brilliant because it's like, okay, if you're like, and I've noticed that too, of like, okay, I'm going to take, or even if I'm going to take this new belief and then it'll push the other one out. I think that's also a big block, because I think you have to dissolve the old one and kind of understand a little bit more of that, you creating space. I use the analogy of like a book on a bookshelf. If you have an old belief and it's sitting there, you try to shove the new one on, then the new one's going to fall off because there's not room. But when you talk about that, and if you're not looking at the whole system, then you're looking through the new belief, the expanded belief, through the filter of what created the limiting belief. So even if it's bigger, you're still limiting it because you haven't gone to the whole system,
Exactly. You're trying to change it from another concept that you might not be aware of, which might hold another limiting belief. So like changing your belief system from within a system that you're not aware of what it contains, what it holds. It's funny that you talk about the bookshelf and trying to squeeze another book in there. I sometimes talk about it as you just keep adding food to the same plate. You're like, oh, here's a dish of pasta. And then you're like, no, I'm going to have a stew. It's like you're just adding things on top without, clearing it, without cleaning it in between.
Yeah, which it's like, okay, some of those could be good combos, but then if you're getting dessert on top, and also too, if like, if you're using that analogy of the food, and there's some older food that maybe you don't want to eat anymore, maybe it's been sitting on the plate and it's like a week old, and you're like, okay, let's throw that away. But you're like, no, I'm going to use this plate to keep adding. And it's like, well, clearly all of that's going to be contaminated eventually as it starts, cross-pollinating too. And like,
exactly.
Yeah. That's
fermenting a little bit there at the bottom.
Yeah,
Because, I mean,
good
that's
in
why I make
wine.
that. Yeah. And that's why I make that analogy, because with the plate, it's so obvious. It's like, no, of course I wouldn't add food on top of each other. Like I would eat it or throw it away or clear it. But it's after a while, when you start understanding really how belief systems work, it is that obvious. It's like you see how it's layered, and you realize that if I keep layering things here, I'm just adding to the problem.
Yeah. So how do you, with like in your perspective right now and in your work that you've been doing with people, how do you start that process of removing the old food, or like starting to become aware of a system that's out of your conscious awareness? Like, it's always that dance. How do I know something that I don't know? Like, where do you jump on that merry-go-round, really?
Yeah. And it's I talk about it as a skill set. So it's not about just the process, just the protocol of changing a belief. It's like some skills that you need to practice before you can do it. It's the same thing like riding the bicycle or going out to swim. There are certain emotions that you need to learn, and then you put them together. So it all starts with awareness of what kind of patterns you are in, what kind of patterns your mind is playing out, what thought goes with what emotion, and then leads into what reaction, which brings on more of those emotions and more of those thoughts. So a lot of it is to start observing your own patterns in your everyday life. Like, what is happening when I step into this situation at work, when I have this discussion that I know from long ago with my spouse, whatever it is, like, what is going on? And it's a little bit like slowing down time. Instead of all these neural pathways, these neurons just firing, and you go from point A to Z, like you're at the end, you start slowing things down and say, what happened in between? And as you're doing this, something else happens. So it's the action of start observing and what you're learning from it. But what is also like a side effect, or maybe the whole main effect of it, is that you start observing. You're stepping into a role where you're not engaging with all these patterns, but you automatically have stepped back into the observer of them, that all kind of meditation teachings and all of this work talks about. So instead of like, oh, I need to be in the observer, like, well, take actions, practice things that will bring you into the observer point of view. So that's the first step. And once you have that, now you can learn other skills. One of them is learn to shift your emotional state, because this will bring you agency. This will often have you come to the realization that, oh, I'm the one who's mixing the cocktail of my emotional state that's happening inside of me. And yes, I have been pointing at everything around me, all the external circumstances, and said, I'm feeling this way because of that and because of this. But now you start realizing, okay, yes, this is happening, that is happening. And when that is happening, I'm mixing this cocktail inside of me unconsciously. I've been programmed to do it. So that's another skill. And from there, it starts taking off, because now you have some emotional skills and you have some skills of observing your thoughts. And now you can start mapping and seeing what beliefs are underneath these patterns. And once you start seeing them, now you can start taking them apart, because they have like different components to them, a belief.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too on that, because I always like it's like a horror movie for me when I realize it's like, oh my God, in the scary movie where like the call is coming from inside the house, like all this time, like that thing, that person, oh my God. And I like when you were talking about becoming aware and like just stepping into that, what I think happens is like, if you can just, even for a moment, even just like a hypothetical, what if you don't look for a meaning like, oh, look, my partner's going to come and they're going to reject me or whatever. Or, oh, I'm back at my boss. I'm going to be in trouble. I did something that wasn't right or not good enough. Like, what if you just waited and just didn't try to hurry up and write in the ending? Oh, this means this, because essentially you're trying to get that, jump to the meaning, and in my opinion, kind of trying to guard. Like, I know this is going to hurt like this. And really, since you're looking for it, we talked earlier, confirmation bias, even though I think we get like Bruce Lipton said, we get like 40 million information bits to our subconscious and we only process like 40 a second. Yeah. So it's like we have all these other opportunities of like components that we could grab and put together and tell a different meaning. But since we're looking for one specific, it's literally tunnel vision. And so, if you're under that system and you're looking through that lens, you find the parts, like you said, and you're like, yes, I'm weaving together my story of victimization, of meaningless, of, abandonment, whatever the thing. So when you start becoming aware, I think it's like, oh my God, look at all these other things here that I've never seen a possibility for something new. Yeah.
Yeah, you create freedom. You're stepping out of that old box of beliefs that you used to live in. And just like you said, how can you know that something else is there, that something else is possible for you from inside that box? That's hard. I mean, you don't really. You just have to trust what other people are telling you, or try it out for yourself and see what happens when that box is starting to open up and the walls are getting bigger. And you're like, oh, that circumstance didn't immediately go to this reaction. What happened? And that's often what it feels like when a belief has been taken out. It's more of silence. Like you're almost listening for the same reaction that you're used to having, the same narrative inside there. And you're like, it's not there. And now it's like that world opens up. You're not in the same reality anymore.
And I do think it's, you talked earlier about, that process of like, this thing happens and the thoughts and that finger of blame comes out, which I was told, I thought this was interesting, that the blame, it's like a blame praise polarity when you're in your bottom three chakras. And if those bottom three chakras or energy systems, whatever, are more of an out of whack, it's hell, because you're held in these like limitations and these, wounds basically. But the polarity of that I think is interesting. But you talked earlier about thoughts and then the chemicals that they're producing, because they work have a thought, release a chemical in your body, and that cocktail, you're addicted to it. So your body's like, ooh, boy, I can't wait to feel worthless. And obviously consciously you don't want to, but you're used to it. And anything you're used to, just like if you wake up at a certain time or, something happens at a certain time every day, you're used to it. So when it doesn't happen, there's like your body knows it has a timing. So it's like waiting for it. So there could be an element of like, what is happening? Or even sometimes I felt in some hard ones that I was really addicted to these emotions and these experiences where it's like, almost like, oh God, something bad is happening. It's just something is different and you're not used to that. So it's just unfamiliar. And really for me, just like stamping in, like, this is not familiar. It's not dangerous. This isn't familiar. And making sure I knew that to help that expansion, because it can feel uncomfortable for sure for me personally.
Oh, yeah. And that's why it can be helpful to try and rewire yourself into like, uncomfortable is good. Like uncomfortable means new. Uncomfortable is where we want to go. While your mind and those habitual patterns of the neural pathways that has kind of formed deep tractor tracks that it's like so easy to go into again, they will try and pull you there. And that feels familiar, even if you're suffering in there, even if they're painful, even if they're, not fun. There's something with them that feels familiar, and our mind is going for the familiar rather than the unknown.
Yeah. To me, it's always important. Like, I haven't experienced, like, the thing that I want to experience is outside of what I've experienced. So in the unknown is, like you're saying, it's in there. Like, this is good. But that was one thing for me where it's like, oh, I feel uncomfortable. I'm doing it wrong. And that's another thing too, is like everyone, like you and me, and then everyone watching, like it's all going to be different. And you kind of taking these tools and understanding the concept, but the way that you execute them and how you do it, I believe is all unique, because there's not one of us who's lived a week that's the exact same. So the way we unravel, conceptually, it's going to be similar, but the execution of it, because I found myself in that, like, okay, I want to unravel this. I'm going to look for that person. Okay, I'm going to try to be just like them. Oh, I'm messing up. I can't do it. But realizing eventually, oh, I do it in my own way. This person kind of gives me structure. I kind of see how they did it.
Yeah.
And using those as just kind of inspirations or just frameworks, but the one for you might look a little bit different.
Yeah, and start celebrating. I think we're touching on a few different really good points here to kind of befriend on your journey for change, both with the one befriending the unknown, befriending what feels uncomfortable because it means you're moving towards something new, but also what you're pointing to now of like, can you befriend that? Yeah, all these new sensations and feelings, and see also that your journey, that it might be unique, that it might not be as anyone else's. And that's something to celebrate too.
Yeah.
Because you will have your unique learning experience and your unique learnings to come from that to share with others.
I was going to say, yeah, you could actually be an inspiration as you're looking outside and you're doing your thing, paving roads. Not that that's your main purpose, but as a beneficial byproduct for somebody else. Yeah. They watch you and they see you, and then that encourages you and inspires you, and you can go back and forth with that energy. And the one thing you just were bringing up that we had talked about but we never got into is the befriending the resistance.
Oh yeah.
Which you're like, oh boy, here we go. Yeah. Now we're talking. But I wanted to talk about that a bit and like your perspective on it, and the idea behind it.
Yeah, I see that's a big mindset shift that is helpful to make. I know it's been for me, and I see it in many of my clients. Like in the beginning, it sounds something like, oh, I've had ups and downs this week. It's been good and it's been bad. I made progress and then I fell back down again. And when I start asking them, so what is the setbacks? What do they look like? Oh, I was trying to practice gratitude, or I was trying to do the breathing relaxation, or I was trying to journal about my patterns. But then there was procrastination showing up. I didn't want to go do it. Or there was this big tension in my body when I tried to relax. Mm. So there's often this sense of, I'm here, I want to get to here, and now something shows up in the way. Mm. And how we're used to relating to that is, get out of my way. Yeah. I'm trying to get to here. I'm trying to be relaxed. I'm trying to feel gratitude. But now this is in the way. And I mean, you probably heard it a million times, anyone who's watching this, but like, what's in the way is the way. Mm. These are the blocks that are showing up as connected with what you want. It all goes together in a big root system in this tree. Mm-hmm. So if you say, I want to go here, what is in the way will be presented to you, basically. So if you say, even, and it doesn't have to be with these big manifestations or intents of, oh, I want to get rich, or I want to meet the love of my life, or whatever it is. It can just be, I want to sit down and relax. I want to quiet my mind. That's an intent as well. And then the mind chatter starts. And you're like, and now you feel frustrated because you're not getting to what you intended. But to befriend that resistance and start welcoming it and say, hey, you're what I need to see. You are what I need to be with in order to get to where I want to go.
Yeah, the way you're saying that is like really kind of sheds light in a way that I'd never seen it, because there's the idea of like whatever you resist persists. Yeah. I'm like, okay. But when you were saying that, the visual I got is like, okay, you talked about a root system and like the end, the belief system, the roots of that belief system, if you say it's being abundant or making whatever amount or having the love of your life, or being that secure relationship. The belief system of that, like its roots are pushed up into the like vertical, and that's what's blocking you. But really there's just a difference in the belief you have on one side. Yes. And the block is you facing where the difference is, right? Where it's like if you're doing a matching game, you're like, oh wait, okay, I can use the outside, the external, to kind of gauge a little bit more. Okay, oh, what is that feeling? Oh, actually, yes. If I really dig deep, I don't feel like, obviously Carolyn Elliott and Byron Katie, I don't feel like, I feel selfish if I got that many resources or whatever. Yeah. And then as you start to let that dissolve, and again, we talk about getting space and not just pushing one for the other, but really completely changing that system, then it's like, as that aligns, I feel like, then that block, then you're more in line with it. So you can actually move through it, or, whatever the thing, but it's like, whoa, yeah, I never thought about it that way, of like the path, the block is actually the info you need to get to the other thing. It's the key.
Yes, yeah, because this is the belief system. This is the life. This is the entity of the belief system. It's not just one belief that is a thought, a sentence. It has components to it, and it branches out. It's much more like the neural pathways or a root system. Like, here is one belief and it's connected with another one over here. They're working together, and then thoughts and emotions and nervous system reactions is all connected in there. So trying to just erase a thought from your mind won't take away the belief. So, but something else that this also exposes to you, when something shows up, it tells you this is part of that belief system. It's a component in there. So it's good to see it. But what else it will expose is how you, and not just you, core you, but program of the mind you that you've been identified with, has been relating to other parts of the mind. Mm-hmm. So now when you notice that, okay, the mind chatter is here when I'm trying to meditate and calm my mind, how are you reacting to it, that the mind chatter is there? Are you getting frustrated? Are you getting stressed? Are you getting angry? Are you tensing? That tells you who's been in charge of relating to the different parts of your mind. Because this is often how, we go into one identification and then we blame another part of our mind for doing something wrong. And then, we're just moving around between these different parts of the mind. And when you're truly stepping into that observer and stepping back from this, you can see that none of them are you. Mm. Not the obstacle, but also not the one reacting to the obstacle.
Mm-hmm. Just all the parts. And when you were saying that too, going back to that example, it's like it's showing you a way that you're relating to your future self, yes. Like, and that's just like so fascinating, of like, oh, I can't do this. And like, you're basically making yourself inferior, and that other thing superior. So an issue of worth.
Yeah. And, you're abandoning. Yeah. You're like an abdication of power to these circumstances and to these parts where you're not in your power.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest things for me that I'm learning is how, to feel powerless, whatever's happened up until now in everyone's situation. Like, there have been, maybe you started out feeling like you didn't have power because you had an authority, whatever, parent or teacher take it, or, you learned to be in that inferior. But since then, you like sign away, and you're keeping it outside of you by giving that validation more importance than your own, just continual perpetual self-abandonment and, suppression of yourself, and being like, oh my God, okay, I'd like to unsubscribe from that, just as you do, like, that's literally, you just start unsubscribing to all of these things and start realizing, oh my God, oh, that, like, I realized a huge thing between money and, what was it the other day? I had like oh my God, I'm doing the same thing. Oh, like work, how I spend my time there. And then money. And there was like another thing too, where I'm like, oh my God, those are all the same ways that I'm relating just to that different topic. And even though they all feel different, and then I use them to stack it on myself. Yes. And be like, oh, look, I can't do it. look at this. And it's like, oh, I'm just doing
one
the exact
follow the
same
other and giving proof for the first. And
I'm just literally multiplying them. So, I do it unconsciously to like, oh, okay, you know what? Okay, we're gonna crank it. Let's put it on a 10x. And then I'll try all the things, relate to it all the same way, and then stack them. But it's the system that's doing it. And the more I unsubscribe and realize, because that's the thing, I was like, oh, I'm just doing that. And automatically it dissipated because I realized what I was doing and I didn't jump into that. I wasn't involved in that, play. I was just like, oh, it wants to do that thing. Okay.
And now you're talking about one of the very powerful ways of dismantling or taking apart a belief, which is like taking your faith out of it, or just like subscribing or unsubscribing, like you said, and saying like, I'm not going to engage with it anymore. I'm not going to feed it. Because it was something that you mentioned earlier about like these habitual patterns, some of them that we've just, and I love the analogy of like the horror movie, the call is from inside the house, because that's what we've done. I mean, that's what we've done. We have internalized all these patterns. I talked to a client last week, and he's working through his anger issues. And that's how he sees it. That's the symptom. He's seeing all this anger coming out towards his elderly mom, who's taking care of at home, and towards his family and at work. But, digging a little deeper and seeing the layers, like, what is it that's there? And it's an internalization of, often your parents, you made that harsh voice of your father or mother or some other caretaker. They're not even there anymore. His dad is dead. Like he doesn't live anymore. He's not alive, but inside of him, he is.
Yeah. He like took the torch, and then now he's enacting. Yeah.
Yes. So some of these things turn into habitual patterns that just stay because we repeat them and repeat them and repeat them. And unsubscribing is a very good way of just like, okay, I'm going to step away and see what's falls to the floor. Like what's
and
there.
Most of it all will fall because it like is literally looking for you to give it energy. And when you don't, it's just like one of those things when you're little and you push the strings and then it collapses and then you pull it apart and it stands up. And that's another thing too, is I had a false idea that when that was gone, like it would just never come up in my head. Yeah. But it can come up and then it's like the breeze blows. And I'm not like, oh my God, now the wind is forever going to blow from that direction. You know that it'll pass. And the same thing is, even if these ideas, because the connections are so intense in your brain on some of these beliefs, but just watching them every time, it's less power and less power, and it might pop up, and you don't have to respond or engage, which gives it energy and gives it fuel. So it's like a little tiny, like a spark on the ground. You're like, oh God, let me douse it with gasoline. I want to try so hard, and you're literally giving it energy to grow, as opposed to like, oh, and then it sizzles out. And it's
but I'm curious, what did you find was important for you? Because what you're talking about is simple, but not necessarily easy. I mean, what you said, like that addiction to it, you mentioned it like, I can't stay away from that bag of chips. Like I have to have it.
Yeah.
So what was there something like a motivation or something?
The magic pill?
Or a motivation that kind of trumped, like, I'm going to do this. I'm motivated enough to step away from my drugs.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think a lot of failed attempts of trying, and then you're trying like, okay, I didn't do it. Oh, it's not like, oh my gosh, sometimes it's like a complete perspective shift. And you just never see the thing and value the thing. I think that kind of can come originally or throughout the process. But for me, it's starting to realize how much this is hurting me. And that the cost of that now greatly outweighs the effort to try the new thing. Me failing over and over and over to try this. Okay, I'm going to observe it. Oh, I failed. I got in it. And like there were times like, okay, I'm going to observe. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing the thing. And I observe myself in the thing, doing the thing. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. And then I do it again. And I'm like, okay, I'm observing. Oh, I want to do that thing. Or I start to do it. And then I let go. And then it was like, oh, I can see that I want to do that thing. I can see that I want to engage. And then, but for me, ultimately, it was just a lot of introspection and paying attention, like not going, like realizing, oh, I'm totally, I'm just kind of spaced out. I'm just involved in the thing and I'm not an investigator. Really, I'm like a detective to myself. Because that's one thing I've seen is like, okay, I'm going to do my affirmations and visualizations. And then people go through their day and then they go back to the old thing. And then they're like, why didn't anything change? Well, look how much of your time are you spending observing or looking to try to influence that new system and dissolve the old one? Or you just like, okay, here's 5% and then 95% just rule,
Old
with
pattern.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think paying attention, realizing what's going on, like starting to think like, well, what if this could be different? What if I am doing certain things that are, I'm participating in this, circumstance? And like just starting to ask questions for me, I think helped really dissolve.
And I hear something when you're talking about this, like between the lines, that I also find as two really important components to really make these changes for yourself. It's an unbending will, like motivation to, I'm going to do it, and to see it, to subscribe to play the long game.
Yeah, that's a great point. Long game, there's not a certain like, oh my God, my life 2 months ago, I had no, self-worth. And now, not to say that you can't have a realization of like, wow, all
making
this time,
a big leap. Yeah.
Yeah, like I didn't realize like in creativity, I was mostly an athlete growing up. And then I traced back to the fact that I think I was like 15 and I was doing an English assignment in school. And the instructor or the teacher was like, oh, this is so not creative. Like there's no creativity. And like, so the seed of that was like, oh, I'm just an athlete. And how I pushed away any kind of creative thing. And I hid behind an identity that I didn't have to. But really, I was afraid. And I gave that meaning. This woman was like very sick. She was going through a cancer chemo. Like as my adult mind is like, oh, wow, she was really struggling. And she probably had a lot of feelings that she didn't know how to deal with. And not that was right, and I can unhook from that belief that I wasn't creative or that opinion mattered, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for me, like you said earlier, that will, and for me it's like a cost benefit. How much is it costing me to continue to subscribe? Because every moment you have a choice. It's not like, oh, I'm just perpetually, like you are continually participating in the old one, and when that cost is more detrimental than trying the new, I think that's when it shifts, and you like there's like no other choice, because you're like, I certainly don't want to do that. That's way too dangerous and costly to continue to give my life away in that way, because I know I don't like it. What about this new thing?
Yes.
And the scariness of living the rest of your life like that far outweighs in the scariness of the new stuff that could come in.
But that takes some awareness to start seeing that too.
Yeah.
Because again, we're operating from inside the box, inside the program, and the program might be telling us, no, that's too hard, that's too difficult, I won't be able to change. Other might have, but I have this very special suffering that I can't recover from.
Yeah.
Or it's like all these obstacles of, no, I shouldn't invest time and money. I don't have the time for it. I don't have the money for it. But then spending money on other things. So it's often a waking up process to realize that, well, you are already investing money and time and energy into that old pattern. And what is that costing you? Is it actually more? Does it cost more to keep that whole structure up? Because basically it's what we're doing. It seems comfortable and out of habit, but
we
are holding it up with a lot of energy and tension.
Yeah, that's a great point, is that like it's not choosing to start investing or to start giving it energy. You're doing it. You're pouring that bucket of water into, the container. Which one do now you want to? Because you can do the other one. It might look a little different and feel a little different, but yeah, you're already doing it. That's a great point too. Of like when people are like, I want to manifest, it's like you're already doing it.
Yes.
And if you want to make changes to your belief system, to your internal, all that, and recalibrate it, that's great. And you're already doing it. Currently, you're doing it. No matter what you're doing, you're believing, you're putting your tokens every day into a container of beliefs.
is not a new skill. You're doing it, but unconsciously. And now the question is, are you ready? Are you willing to step into the conscious creator of your life?
That could be like the first step, like just asking yourself, is that something that you want to do? For me personally, starting to reach out with friends, starting to read books, starting to watch videos, starting to invest in, different coachings, different programs, one-on-one, like bodywork stuff. That really helped me, more somatic therapy, because my brain body connection wasn't there. I didn't tap into my emotions. I'm like, I don't really have emotions. That wasn't true. I wasn't aware. And so because I wasn't aware of my emotions, guess what I found in the world? People who would ignore my emotions because I didn't even know what was going on. But yeah, also too, seeing the external reflection and helping me. But again, it's all process, and there's all these different components. It's like if you threw Legos out on the floor and you're like, build something. Everyone coming in is going to be different. I think that just, realizing that there's not a wrong way. The best thing to do is just, if you want to make the change, start looking to how you can expand your awareness, or what it looks like, what's looked like for other people.
The commitment, the intent is really the first step. And then, start finding that path. But that's, I think, something that I notice with beliefs, like the one most common thing that people overlook when trying to change their beliefs. And especially if they're narrowing down on one and saying, oh, I want to change this one, and not seeing the full. And what you're talking about, that act of will, of like, unsubscribe. I'm taking my money out of this investment. No more energy goes in there. I'm not going to feed it anymore. But sometimes it's almost impossible, because your nervous system will just jump there without you. It feels like you don't have a saying. So that act of will is not possible yet, because it's like you can't execute your willpower towards it, because it all happens so
the physiological. You're literally taken over physically.
With trauma, for example, or with other responses. And what I'm teaching in that is to understand the belief, like the different components of a belief, because it's always like, if you want to change something, you need to understand how it was put into place. Like if you want to take it out, then understand how it got there. Exactly.
I believe the same.
Look under the hood of it. What's there? So a belief has different components. It's the thought of, I'm not worthy, for example, or whatever it is. I'm not creative. So there's the thought, and it might be hidden, because with your rational mind, it's like, oh, no, of course, that's not true. I know it. But in your unconscious, you believe it. So it's not about what's obvious for you here. You need to go look down here. So the thoughts is one thing, how it's kind of spoken, the meaning, the sentence. But then we've often formed an identification around it, like you described. Now you've started building an identity around not being creative. Oh, I'm doing this instead, and I'm making myself feel good by being an athlete, or compete and having good results and feeling accomplished and all of that. So we start making decisions from this belief that are now forming one identity and possibly many identities. One that's maybe protecting ourselves from criticism about not being creative. So we say it before anyone else can tell us that we're not. So we form, an inner judge and an inner fixer and an inner victim, and all of these that are all connected with this belief. So there are several identities with it. And then there's emotion in here. And that's what people often miss when they're just trying to replace one belief with another, or just like, can I just take it out or unsubscribe from it or step away from it? But if the emotion is pulling you in there again and again, And especially because I recognize myself in what you describe of like, I don't have emotions, so I'm fine, I'm okay.
I didn't get any dash of that when I was being made. They forgot the container. I'm so strong.
Yes.
I'm so, look at me.
That didn't kill me, and I'm fine.
Look how tough I am. Look at my identity and my proof of
totally. Yeah. And I don't need anyone, and I don't need that stuff. And I don't, So I had the same protection mechanism around my emotions because it just felt scary. I hadn't learned how to be present with my emotions. So learning that, okay, emotion is a component in this bowl, in this breakfast bowl of cereal or something that the belief is. And the emotion is kind of what's holding all of that together. And then the bowl itself, like the plate, the bowl is your faith. Because like you mentioned, we have a bunch of many thoughts, many impressions that are hitting our unconscious daily, but we don't make beliefs out of all of them. And we don't put our attention on all of them, but they're the ones that have been formed as a belief early on that we then, repeat and look for. But this one that has been formed into a belief, that has formed identity, like learning to release the emotion out of the belief is often when you can't get anywhere, when you're like, I'm trying to unsubscribe, I'm trying to step out of it, but it's keep pulling me back and back and back. Then the journey is often to get in touch with the emotion that it was put into place with. Because beliefs can be put into place in different ways. Both with repetition, like habitually, again and again and again, or it's put into place with a strong emotional imprint.
I was just thinking that. I was like, or there's that dramatic, like, boom, that one's so intense that like it could have been like something where you felt like you were really little and I'm physically in danger, even though an adult might not think that. It doesn't matter their perspective, it matters your perspective, how you interpreted it. And it was just like branded deeply because you felt like you might not live or you were very, very much in danger. So that is instantly just the same as I think the other way can, a big kind of emotional realization can start unwinding it. And let that all dissolve. But
so being scolded, for example, for being angry when you're little, and now you might feel shame. Now probably anger is connected with shame inside of you. Those neurons have been connected, so they're firing together now in a pathway. And you will probably try to avoid both feeling anger because that's not safe, and shame is not a comfortable feeling to feel. So you will probably try and avoid that. So now the question is, what do you put on? What do you put on top? People pleasing, being the funny person, a bunch of jokes, being all lighthearted and like, oh, nothing is a problem, whatever it is. So
I was like,
the protection mechanism can take so many different expressions. Like there are flowers,
or probably weave in depending on the situation. I like what you're saying is me, where I have like you can say a lot of energy, a lot of very strong reactions to things, anger, very high joy, very intense. And not being understood as a kid, that's too much, or we don't do that, that's not the right thing. And a lot of suppression. And then it's like, okay, well, now I'm not in touch with my feelings. That's no one's fault. Things happen. That's another thing too, is like I had a hard time being like, I don't want to blame anyone like that, being scared and protecting the people I care about, that they had done something wrong. It's like, you don't have to judge right or wrong. Everyone in your life has done the best they could where they were up until now. They were doing the best they could, and it had an effect on you, and you being there for you and processing and getting the needs you need is important. With that, you don't have to blame anyone, because that was my thing. And like letting down my emotions come out, and realizing it's not a shameful thing. It's actually more detrimental for me to suppress them, because then I'm out of touch and I can't connect. And one of my big needs in life is to connect and have, meaningful connections and conversations with people. So the one way I can't block out my intense emotions and have that. So, realizing there's a place for everything, and maybe sometimes I get a little riled up, and that's not bad. it's part of me, and, embracing that and not keeping it in shadow. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And seeing that, okay, yeah, we might try and avoid what we're trying to avoid is maybe that scolding from our parents, but it's often also an emotional state inside of us. Like, oh, that scolding brought up shame. Shame is not comfortable. I'm going to try and avoid it. So a lot of these protection mechanism, this managing that we do around other people is not, sometimes it's about what will other people think of us. That's the thought. But what emotion would that produce inside of you?
Yeah, that's ultimately avoiding feelings, it's also about like, okay, I want them to respond this way so that I feel blank. I don't want them to feel this way because then that means blank. Because it's like what you're getting. And that's the thing too, because I was suppressing myself so much, I started realizing, oh my God, I'm so manipulative because I didn't want to deal with negative things. I didn't want to feel like an outcast or too much. So I was editing so much and not being me. So guess what? I didn't get connections with people. Because how are you going to connect with something you don't even know what is there? But and like really being like, oh, okay, I'm afraid of like feeling rejected. I'm afraid of being neglected.
And I've made a connection that them looking at me this way or saying this
automatically means
produces this cocktail inside of me again.
Yeah. And just like, staying in that, realizing, okay, well, like you said, having that starting to realize the emotions. What is my fear? Yeah. And am I willing to feel my feelings, really?
Yes.
It's simple, like you said. It is not very comfortable sometimes, but I think that's a really good place to end. I thank you very much for all of your wisdom. And for people who want more of you, I know you have a podcast and a website. Where can they find both of those?
So the easiest way is to go to my website, selfmasteryandbeyond.com. And there you find my podcast, the Uncover You podcast also, which you can listen to on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all of that.